The disbarment paradox. Miles Harlan was 3 bourbons deep and halfway through preparing closing remarks for a pharmaceutical racketeering case when his office door slammed open with the kind of force that didn't allow for pleasantries. His legal assistant, Nadine, normally calm and aloof, looked breathless. "There's a man here," she said. "No appointment. Says he's your next case." Miles leaned back in his chair, letting the leather groan beneath him. "I already have a next case," he replied. "It starts in federal court on Monday. He says it can't wait. He's from Langley." That got his attention. "Send him in," Miles said, standing, smoothing out the wrinkles in his white shirt. The office still stank of cigar-smoking Chinese takeout. He didn't care. Let the spook smell how real work gets done. The man who entered wore no badge, no credentials, and no coat. He was in a black sweater, dark jeans, and shoes too quiet for city pavement. His eyes flicked over the room once, like taking inventory. "Mr. Harlan," he said, offering a hand. "My name's not important. What is important is the man I'm here about." Miles crossed his arms. "You've got 60 seconds. The man dropped the file onto the desk. No name on the cover. No government seal. "Ezra Clay," the man said. "Former NSA, Signals Intelligence Division, currently being held without bail. He's been charged with the murder of Senator Howard Dwyer." Miles blinked. "Wait, that case? I saw it on the news this morning. The guy walked into a fundraiser, blew Dwyer's skull into soup in front of 70 donors." The man didn't blink. "That's the narrative. Clay claims he didn't do it. Claims it was staged." Miles opened the file. Sparse. 2 sparse. A mugshot. Arrest report. 3 redacted pages. "This is a press kit," he said. "If you want me to take this case, I need evidence, not marketing." "You'll get it," the man replied, "but not before you agree. Clay asked for you. By name. Repeatedly. He said, and I quote, 'Miles Harlan is the only person who hasn't been bought.'" That didn't sound like a compliment. It sounded like bait. "Why me?" Miles asked. The man leaned forward. "Because we need someone credible. Someone loud. Someone who can put on a show." That was 3 days ago. Now Miles stood in the courtroom, waiting for the arraignment to begin, flanked by marshals and cameras. He hadn't even had a chance to speak to Clay yet. The moment the press caught wind that the Miles Harlan had taken the case, it became a circus. The judge walked in Cormac Voss, a man with a face like a blunted knife. Ex-Marine. 0 tolerance for theatrics. Miles had tried one case under him a decade ago. Lost. Spectacularly. "All rise," the bailiff barked. The courtroom stood. The judge sat. "Case number 4. 879 2D. United States versus Ezra Clay," Voss said. "Defense counsel, state your appearance." "Miles Harlan, Your Honor. Mr. Clay is charged with first-degree murder of a federal official. Given the political nature of the case, the court is granting limited press access under protective order. Bail is denied. Let's move to plea." The cell door behind Miles creaked open. 2 guards escorted Ezra Clay into the room. Moot. He was taller than Miles expected. Slim, alert. His orange jumpsuit was crisp, like he'd pressed it himself. He took the defense table seat without so much as a glance at Miles. "Your client may plead," said the judge. Clay looked directly at the bench and said calmly, "Not guilty, Your Honor, because Senator Dwyer is not dead." The room erupted. The prosecution team shifted uncomfortably. Reporters in the gallery were nearly leaping over one another to tweet. Judge Voss banged his gavel. "Silence. Mr. Clay, are you suggesting the body recovered?" "I'm suggesting," Clay interrupted, "that the person who died was not Howard Dwyer, and I have evidence to prove it." Miles felt a sharp chill crawl up his spine. That wasn't the kind of thing a lawyer wanted to hear after entering a plea. He leaned toward his client. "We need to talk. Privately. Immediately." Clay turned his head and finally locked eyes with him. "I'm glad you're here," he said. Because once this begins, you'll need to decide if you're defending me or defending the truth. You can't do both. The holding cell smelled like sweat and bleach, the kind of chemical cleanliness meant to imply safety while hiding the scent of fear. Miles stood across from Ezra Clay at the bolted-down metal table, fingers drumming against his legal pad, his bourbon withdrawal pounding behind his eyes. "Start talking," Miles said. Clay sat with a military stillness, hands folded. "Everything you've read about the assassination is a lie." "I haven't read anything," Miles snapped. "You dropped a murder plea bomb in open court, and now I'm cleaning up your crater. So try again. Slowly this time." Clay leaned back, watching Miles like he was the one evaluating credibility. "There was no assassination," he said. "The man that died at the fundraiser wasn't Senator Dwyer. He was a decoy, a placeholder." Miles stared at him. "You're saying the U.S. government faked the death of a sitting senator?" "I'm saying someone faked it, and the government bought the story. Or sold it. You understand how insane that sounds?" Clay's lips curled. "Do you think I'd risk my life with a defense like that unless it was true?" Miles opened his notepad, flipping to the clean page. "Let's assume I don't care whether you're telling the truth or selling a myth. I'm your attorney. My job is to win. So what's the angle? What evidence do you have that Dwyer's still alive?" Clay hesitated. That was the first moment Miles saw a crack, something flickering behind his eyes. "There's a recording," Clay said finally. "A black bag surveillance feed, night vision. Date stamped the morning after the fundraiser. Dwyer's in it, speaking with two men inside a Department of Energy storage facility in Nevada." Miles stopped writing. "That recording exists?" he asked. Clay nodded once. "And someone has it. Who?" "I don't know. I had a copy. My apartment was wiped. No signs of forced entry. Drives destroyed. Backup servers scrubbed." Miles swore under his breath. "And you didn't turn it over to the press because people who touch this story die." Clay leaned forward, his voice quieter now, charged. "There are parts of the federal system that don't follow orders from the top. A theory of dynamics. Division 77. Hallow. You've never heard of them. You weren't supposed to. But they were supposed to make Dwyer disappear quietly. He went rogue. He threatened to go public. They needed a public death to close the loop." Miles stared, unable to tell if his client was brilliant, delusional, or worse, both. "You're saying you were framed as part of an op to kill a double of a senator who was already threatening to expose a covert agency that doesn't officially exist?" Clay tilted his head. "Now you're catching up." Miles sat back, jaw tight. Jesus Christ. Later that night, Miles sat alone in his office. Rain tapped at the window. The city was glowing orange and cold. He hadn't turned the lights on, preferring the shadows. The only glow came from the evidence tablet on his desk. He replayed the fundraiser video. Again, it was all over the news. Ezra Clay entering the event in a black suit, gun raised, a single shot fired. Senator Dwyer collapsing to the floor. Blood, screams, cell phones catching it all in jittery frames. But something bothered him now. He paused on a still frame. The senator, mid-fall, his hand reaching up. Not in defense, in signal. Miles zoomed in, enhanced the frame, adjusted the lighting filters. Dwyer's hand formed two fingers held against his neck, then extended out in a sharp, horizontal line. A motion. Deliberate. A code? He barely had time to make a note before the office phone rang. It was past midnight. He let it ring twice before picking up. "Harlan." Silence. Then, "You're being watched. They know you spoke to him." Miles straightened. "Who is this?" "You've already made contact. Keep going. Don't trust your clerk." The line went dead. Mix. He stared at the phone for a long second, then slowly lowered it. He opened his bottom drawer and pulled out the Smith & Wesson revolver he hadn't touched since 2012. Something about this case wasn't just dangerous, it was engineered. The next morning, Miles arrived at the courthouse early, with a knot of caffeine, suspicion, and something close to dread gnawing in his chest. He parked 3 blocks away, walked the rest under a gray sky, and checked for tails like he'd done back when he defended mobsters. He didn't see anyone. That only made him more nervous. Inside, the courthouse felt colder than usual. The fluorescent lights buzzed, and the air had that antiseptic chill reserved for institutions that prefer control over comfort. Courtroom 11 was empty except for the bailiff and a paralegal from the prosecution side setting up folders. Miles took his place at the defense table and opened his binder. Except it wasn't his binder. He stared at the open folder. Case number was right, but the contents were wrong. The timelines were altered, witness names redacted. Even the autopsy report, previously a vivid 6-page description of Dwyer's injuries, was replaced with a 3-paragraph summary citing fatal trauma, unremarkable details. He flipped through pages with growing fury. Someone had replaced his trial prep with sanitized garbage. "Hey," he barked. The bailiff looked up. "Who was in this courtroom last night?" "Cleaning crew came through around midnight," the man said. "But that's normal." Miles snapped the folder shut and walked out, jaw clenched. He made straight for his office downtown. He didn't make it. 10 minutes later, Miles was sitting in the back booth of a diner off Madison, a place with greasy booths and broken menus, where signals were weak and cameras barely worked. The burner phone was already vibrating when he sat. He answered. "Didn't take you long," the voice said. Miles kept his tone low. "My files were altered. Evidence stripped. Autopsy reports been scrubbed." The voice was calm. "Hallow protocol. They're attempting to reset the narrative before pre-trial motions begin." "Hallow again. You keep saying that. What the hell is it?" A pause. Then, hypothetical adjudicative layer for legal operations worldwide. It started as a DARPA experiment programmatic influence over legal perception using psychological interference, jury bias enhancement, document disruption, narrative flooding. Miles rubbed his temple. "You're telling me there's a system that rewrites evidence?" "No, I'm telling you there's a network that preempts reality. They don't tamper with truth. They replace it before it ever exists. Your clerk's on their radar." That made him go still. "Nadine?" he said. But the line had gone dead again. He made it back to the office by noon. Nadine was at her desk, typing away like nothing was wrong. "Nadine," he said, pausing at her doorway. "Did you touch my trial prep binder yesterday?" She looked up, confused. "No, I locked the case files in your drawer before I left." Like always. Miles stepped inside. "And the backups?" "I backed them to the cloud and to your external." "Why?" He didn't answer. He went straight to his office, opened the drawer. Both drives were gone. He stared for a long time, then walked back to Nadine's desk. His tone was calm. "I need to check your login activity. I'm not accusing, just verifying." She bristled. "Miles, seriously?" He didn't blink. "Last night someone altered our files and replaced our evidence with false documents. I need to know if you, or anyone using your terminal, was here after hours." She hesitated. Then, something shifted in her face. A flicker of calculation. A flicker too fast. "I told you, I left. I don't have access to your files outside the shared pool." "Your key card was used to enter the building at 1:47 a.m., he said. Now she froze. A full beat passed. "I lost my card last week," she said quietly. "I must have forgotten to deactivate it." It was a lie. Miles didn't say a word. He just nodded, turned, and closed his office door behind him. That night, back at his apartment, Miles played the fundraiser video again. And there framed 212. A man in the background, blurry but distinct, holding up a phone. Not filming, aiming it. Miles enhanced the frame and isolated the object. The shape was wrong for a phone. It was a directional infrared emitter, a device used to trigger autonomous behavior in machines or minds. His laptop pinged. An email had arrived from an anonymous address. No subject, just a .zip file attached. The body of the email read, "If they rewrite the facts, you rewrite them louder." He scanned the file. Clean. He opened it. Inside, the original autopsy report, 2 witness statements from the fundraiser ones he'd never seen, and a time-stamped video labeled Dwyer plus 13 HRS Site B. Move. He hovered his mouse over the file, paused, then double-clicked. The moment Miles clicked the video file, he turned off his apartment's Wi-Fi and slid his phone into the microwave. Paranoia wasn't a luxury anymore, it was policy. The screen flickered. The footage was grainy, green-tinted, time-stamped, 3 hours, 18 minutes, and 4 seconds in the corner. The date was 1 day after the assassination. It looked like it had been shot with military-grade night vision. 3 men stood in a dim, cavernous warehouse metal racks, fluorescent lighting overhead. 2 of the men wore dark suits. The third had silver hair and a distinct limp. Miles leaned forward. Senator Howard Dwyer, the same man whose brain had allegedly painted the walls of the Sheraton Ballroom in D.C., now stood, alive, gesturing animatedly. The audio was garbled but present. Miles cranked up the volume. Not part of the contract, Dwyer was saying. This was containment, not extinction. One of the men spoke in clipped tones. The narrative is moving ahead. You agreed to disappear. This is your exit. I didn't agree to a bullet to the head on live television, Dwyer snapped. You were supposed to simulate, not stage. I didn't consent to a martyrdom protocol. The man in the suit responded. Consent was a formality. You served the operation. You no longer serve the asset pool. Dwyer's eyes widened. You're going to kill me for real. The video cut out, abruptly, mid-frame. The last image, Dwyer stepping backward, his hands shaking. Miles sat still for a long time, the silence in his apartment too heavy to be natural. He rewound and watched again. Dwyer, alive, speaking. Terrified, Nakrasach, a government asset. Expendable. Miles copied the file to 2 encrypted drives and tucked them into separate briefcase compartments. Then he killed the power to his laptop and pulled the battery. He was about to re-enable the Wi-Fi when he heard it. A click from his front door. Not the lock, the hinge. A slow pressure movement. He stood, reaching for the revolver in his desk drawer. He padded to the kitchen, crouched low, eyes on the door. Another sound. A second click. Someone was sliding a tool into the latch. He held his breath, then shouted, I'm armed and I've already sent the file. You get in here, and you're just a body count. Silence. Then, soft footsteps, retreating down the hallway. Silent, he waited 10 seconds before he moved, then bolted to the peephole. No one there. He opened the door slowly. Just a single envelope taped to it. He pulled it down, ripped it open. Inside was a printed courtroom transcript, today's preliminary hearing. But Miles hadn't attended a hearing today. He scanned the document, eyes narrowing. The document claimed he'd waived his right to admit new defense evidence, and the judge had accepted it. His signature was at the bottom, except it wasn't his handwriting. Miles clenched his jaw. His name, his voice, was being forged in a court record. The next morning, he stormed into the courthouse with a purpose that turned heads. He pushed through security, made for the clerk of courts, and demanded to see the digital registry of yesterday's hearings. The clerk blinked. You were there, Mr. Harlan. You argued for a continuance. You signed the request. I saw you myself. No, I didn't, Miles said. The clerk tilted her head. You're wearing the same suit. Miles glanced down. Dark gray wool. The suit he hadn't worn in weeks. He turned and left before he said something that got him arrested. Ross. In the hallway, his phone buzzed. Wubbis. Unknown number. No message. Then again. This time, a voicemail. He played it back on speaker. A man's voice. His own. This is Miles Harlan, counsel for Ezra Clay. I'd like the court to strike all pretrial evidence pending further review. We'll waive all immediate discovery motions. His voice. But he never said it. He felt something in his stomach twist into a knot. They weren't just tampering with evidence. They were tampering with him. By the time Miles returned to his office, his reflection in the elevator mirror looked like a man unraveling, tie crooked, stubble creeping past acceptable, eyes ringed in fatigue and fury. The voicemail hadn't disappeared. That was the worst part. It remained in his call log, fully playable, filed under saved, as if he tucked it there himself. He tried calling the number back. It rang once and disconnected. Nadine was typing at her desk when he entered. "I need a copy of all digital court transcripts from yesterday," he said without stopping. "Full docket, not just ours." She blinked. "Okay. Everything all right?" Miles paused. "I was impersonated on the record. My voice, my name. My client's rights just got shredded, and I wasn't even in the damn building." Nadine looked rattled. "You think it's the prosecution?" "I think it's someone above them. Someone who's rewiring the system like it's a theater set." He slammed his office door behind him and dropped into the chair, pulling out a legal pad. The day's docket revealed something stranger than expected. 2 motions had been filed under his name after court closed. One sealed, one public. The sealed one disturbed him most. Motion to preclude video evidence. Dwyer, +13 HRS Site B.Mov. Filed under his digital credentials. Electronically signed. He hadn't touched the court server in over 12 hours. He printed the motion and highlighted his own signature. Below it, a notation. Filed via secure access, 2:13 a.m. He checked his door log. His office was locked at 10:47 p.m. and hadn't been opened again until morning. So either he'd become a sleepwalking saboteur, or... His thoughts were interrupted by a knock. Not Nadine. The door creaked open and a woman stepped in mid-30s, trench coat, laptop bag slung over her shoulder, red hair pulled into a no-nonsense knot. "Mr. Harlan," she said, cool and professional. "I'm Dana Welch, Assistant U.S. Attorney. I'm taking point on the Clay prosecution." Miles stood slowly. "Didn't realize your office assigned fresh sharks this far in." Her lips twitched at the insult. "Consider it a compliment." "I don't." She stepped inside anyway, uninvited. "I came to discuss your upcoming pre-trial hearing," she said, setting a thick file on his desk. "Given your client's unusual strategy, I thought it wise to clarify the rules before you attempt to turn the courtroom into a conspiracy podcast." Miles didn't touch the file. "I'll match your civility with a question," he said. "Why is your team tampering with digital filings under my credentials?" Welch didn't flinch. "Excuse me?" 2 motions were filed last night. One sealed. Both under my name. I didn't submit either. She arched an eyebrow. "If you suspect a breach, you should report it to the court administrator." "Already did." She gave a tight smile. "Then I'm sure they'll find your hacker." She turned to leave, then paused at the door. "One more thing," she said. "The witness list you submitted 2 days ago? All 3 names are now unavailable." Miles stiffened. "Unavailable how?" 2 no longer live at their listed residences. The 3rd had a sudden transfer to a secure psychiatric unit in Vermont. "Involuntary," Miles's voice dropped. "Those were my first-hand sources from the fundraiser." Welch nodded. "Yes, funny coincidence." Then she was gone. That night, Miles met Clara Wren in the back of a nondescript bookstore 2 blocks from the courthouse. She wore a baseball cap low over her face and a hoodie that swallowed her frame. She hadn't answered any of his texts for 2 days. "You were right," she said before he could speak. "About the video, about the tampering, about all of it." She pulled a drive from her pocket and slid it to him. "This is from a clerk I trust. The court systems are ghostwriting motions using AI-assisted prompts tied to biometric credentials. Anyone who's been scanned at security even once is vulnerable." Miles stared at the drive. "They're forging filings with my retina scan? Retina, voice, even keyboard cadence. It's all stored in federal access logs. They only need a shell to plug it into." "Why you?" he asked. "Why'd they try to scare you off?" She hesitated. Then, because I filed a motion last week to subpoena Etheria Dynamics. Within 12 hours, I was locked out of the building, and 3 armed men showed up at my apartment asking about my mental state. Miles pocketed the drive. They're erasing people, he said. No, Clara corrected. They're rewriting them. The first day of jury selection should have been routine. It wasn't. Courtroom 11 was already packed when Miles walked in. The judge had called for an accelerated voir dire schedule, a move usually reserved for cases involving terrorism or national emergencies. Apparently, Ezra Clay now qualified as both. Judge Voss presided like a statue carved from mistrust, his gavel a blunt instrument. Let's proceed, he growled. Defense and prosecution will have 15 minutes per candidate, no exceptions. Miles took his seat and glanced sideways at Dana Welch. She looked freshly pressed and surgically unbothered, as if none of their prior conversation had occurred. Her poker face could survive a sniper scope. The first juror took the stand. Juror hash 007, a retired postmaster named Harold Dunn. He answered the basic questions. Fine. No relation to the case, no criminal record, no prior jury experience. Then Miles asked, have you ever worked in a capacity involving intelligence, defense contracting, or federal surveillance systems? Harold blinked. No, sir. Are you aware that your tax filings listed 1099 from Etheria Technologies, LLC, in 2022? A murmur rolled through the gallery. Welch's eyes flicked up. Voss scowled. Harold stammered. That must be a mistake. I did some drone software testing through a temp agency. Maybe that was... Thank you, Miles cut in. No further questions. The juror was dismissed, but the damage was done. 3 more potential jurors followed, all with seemingly spotless records, until Miles pointed out inconsistencies. One with a sealed military background, another who lived at the same address as a current DOJ analyst, and a third who, based on metadata from a social media post, had been at the fundraiser the night of the assassination and never reported it. Each one denied it. Each one was dismissed. The 4th juror, a young woman in glasses and a navy blouse, walked to the stand. Juror number 015, name Naomi Cross. Miss Cross, Miles began, what's your understanding of this case? She smiled. A former intelligence agent murdered a senator. The country's watching. Miles paused. And you believe the evidence will show guilt? I believe the defendant was trained to make it look like something else. Miles leaned forward. How do you know he was trained? She hesitated. I read it in the affidavits filed with the motion to suppress. There hadn't been any such affidavit. Miles turned toward the judge. Your Honor, I move to strike this juror immediately and request a sealed sidebar. The court may be dealing with a pre-seated panel. Voss narrowed his eyes. You're alleging the jury pool has been compromised? I'm alleging the pool has been tampered with, not just exposed to prejudicial material injected with it. Welch stood. Your Honor, the defense is grandstanding. Voss slammed his gavel. Sidebar. Now. Inside the chambers, the air felt 10 degrees hotter. You have 60 seconds, Harlan, Voss said. Miles dropped the file onto the judge's bench. Juror Naomi Cross posted 6 months ago on an encrypted forum, ARX Prime, that she was studying experimental jury manipulation strategies in cases involving classified intelligence. The same tag used to source the Dwyer shooting footage leak. Welch snapped. You're referencing an unverified darknet forum? I'm referencing a pattern, Miles said coldly. 5 jurors, 5 anomalies, all linked in some form to Hallow's known data experiments. If you don't strike the entire panel, you'll be presiding over a trial pre-programmed to produce a verdict. Voss looked at him for a long moment. Then he leaned forward. You think you're exposing a conspiracy, Mr. Harlan. But you're not. You're walking blind into one that already assumed you'd resist. This court proceeds. Panel holds. Juror number 015 stays. Miles opened his mouth, but the judge cut him off. One more objection, and I'll see to it you're replaced. Outside the courthouse, cameras swarmed the sidewalk like flies on static. Miles kept his head down until a reporter called out, "Mr. Harlan, is it true you were sanctioned for falsifying evidence in a previous trial?" He froze, turned. "What did you say?" The reporter held up a printed sheet. "Court censure, dated last month, claims you submitted falsified lab results in U.S. versus Mercado." "I've never worked that case," Miles said flatly. "Public record says otherwise." He grabbed the paper, eyes scanning the document. His bar number was listed, his name, the case title, a case that didn't exist. They weren't just faking his filings, they were faking his past. Clara Wren hadn't used her real name in 6 days. She now answered to Eliza Ward, a name pulled from the obituary of a librarian who died in 1992, with just enough living relatives to look legitimate and just few enough to avoid questions. Her burner laptop connected only through rotating proxies, and she slept with a firearm under her pillow in the back of a storage unit she rented in Northeast D.C. She wasn't being dramatic. She was being alive. That morning, she'd cracked the last encryption barrier on an internal Ethereum Dynamics project, index sourced from a whistleblower's drive she'd retrieved, while pretending to be a low-level IT consultant at a federal procurement conference. The project was labeled Halo Prime.001. The contents chilled her. Project Halo. Initial phase, 2009 to 2011. Objective: influence judicial outcomes through digital narrative disruption. Methodology: preceding jury pools with emotionally primed digital content. Biometric mimicry for legal record editing. Psychological attenuation of key actors, e.g., judges, counsel. Outcome: 3 test cases successfully diverted. All verdicts aligned with narrative targets. Test case 1. United States versus Rodrigo Mercado. Verdict influenced. Evidence reversed post-submission. Defense record retroactively altered. Defense counsel disbarred. Clara froze. That name again. Mercado, the same case Miles had just been accused of falsifying. She scrolled further. Counsel assigned: Harlan Miles E., unwitting participant. Result: subject deemed resistant to early-phase narrative modulation. Recommendation: isolate, monitor, neutralize. They'd been targeting Miles for over a decade. Back at his office, Miles poured black coffee with a hand that shook just enough to spill. The newspaper on his desk featured his face above the fold. Star attorneys passed under fire in explosive conspiracy trial. Below it, the same fake story. The Mercado case, the falsified evidence, the bar complaint that didn't exist 2 days ago. Nadine stepped in holding a package. This came by courier. No return address. Miles opened it. Inside, a VHS tape. Black casing. No label. He stared at it like it was a ghost. "Where the hell am I supposed to play this?" "There's a shop in Alexandria," Nadine said. "They transfer old formats. I checked." Miles raised an eyebrow. "You did?" Nadine blinked. "You mentioned needing it yesterday." "I didn't." They stared at each other. Nadine left. He pocketed the tape. Later that evening, Miles sat alone in a tiny AV conversion booth behind a consignment electronics store. The technician inserted the tape, hit record, and left the room. The screen crackled. Static. Then, a recording of a courtroom, not the current trial. Something older, grainy, faded. A defense attorney, Miles, stood at the lectern, giving a closing argument in a case he didn't remember ever trying. But it was him. Same voice, same cadence. The audio crackled louder. "We submit, Your Honor," he said on screen, "that the evidence presented was fabricated by government-linked contractors attempting to discredit and silence our client." The judge on screen leaned forward. Same judge as Clay's trial, Cormac Voss. But younger. This footage was from at least 10 years ago. Miles stared. He couldn't remember ever standing in that courtroom. Not with that judge. Not with that case. Yet there he was. The tape ended with Voss saying, "Mr. Harlan, I'm issuing a formal censure. You are now suspended pending review." Miles sat frozen. They hadn't just rewritten his files. They'd filmed the rewrite. By 9 a.m., the video had gone viral. The VHS footage, grainy, damning, and disturbingly real now, looped across every major news network. A younger Miles Harlan, shouting at a federal judge, accusing the government of evidence tampering in a case no one could find in court archives. Harlan melts down in shadow trial, the headlines read. Cable hosts debated the, quote, psychological state of the defense, with talking heads speculating whether the nation's most famous defense lawyer was cracking under pressure or just waking up to his own paranoia. Miles stood in the courthouse bathroom, watching the video replay on his phone with a mix of fury and dread. He didn't remember giving that argument, but it was him, his voice, his mannerisms, his tie, his fury. It was like watching a dream you'd never had, recorded for the world. He looked up at his reflection, eyes bloodshot, jaw clenched. Behind him, the stall door creaked open. A man stepped out, bald, tall, black gloves, gray suit. Miles turned. The man smiled. "How's the memory holding up?" Miles stared, then lunged, but the man stepped back cool and unthreatened. "We thought you'd crack sooner. You're impressive. Who are you?" "A custodian," the man said. "My job is to clean the gaps." He dropped something into the sink and access badge. "Federal Judiciary. Unassigned." Then he left. Miles stood still until the restroom door clicked shut. He picked up the badge. In court, the trial was ready to resume. Jury selection continued under Voss's gavel, while Miles sat rigid, silent. Dana Welch had already submitted a formal concern regarding Miles's, quote, capacity to continue uninterrupted representation. She requested psychiatric evaluation before pretrial motions resumed. Voss agreed, without asking for a response from the defense. "You will be subject to a 24-hour observation," the judge said, "in accordance with federal code on impaired counsel." Miles stood. "I object," vehemently. "Your objection is noted," Voss said. "Under what authority do you assign medical review without a hearing?" Voss gave a faint smile. "Your precedent. United States versus Mercado." The courtroom laughed. Welch smiled tightly. Miles turned to look at the jury box. Juror hash 015. Naomi Cross stared straight at him, unblinking. He sat down slowly, throat dry. Meanwhile, across the river in a dusty public records basement in Arlington, Clara Wren held a yellowed case folder in her trembling hands. U.S. versus Mercado, file 2010. Redacted, sealed, then deleted. But the folder hadn't vanished. Clara opened it to find photocopies of internal memos, flagged communiques from the DOJ, and one transcript. A court hearing. The presiding judge, Cormac Voss. Her hands clenched. So the case wasn't just real. Moss had overseen it. 10 years ago. Same accusations. Same I manipulated evidence trail. Same planted witnesses. And the defense, Miles Harlan. Except that version of him hadn't survived. The file ended with a single note, scrawled in pen at the bottom of a judicial review slip. Subject, Miles Harlan. Verdict, unreliable asset. Recommend erasure with controlled reintegration. Hello, protocol supervisor. Clara's phone vibrated. A message from an encrypted number. You need to get him out of that courtroom. Today, before they erase him again. Clara pushed through the side entrance of the courthouse, wearing the suit jacket of a public defender and the badge of a retired paralegal she'd borrowed from a friend in Baltimore. Her heart pounded against her ribs like it was trying to signal someone. She had 30 minutes, maybe less. The building's internal surveillance would flag her eventually, but she'd mapped the dead zones and timing gaps. Hallow might rewrite public memory, but it still relied on federal contractors. Contractors who cut corners, cheaped out on software patches, and left enough blind spots for someone like her to slip through. She took the north stairwell to avoid the elevators and reached the second-floor clerk's office. Inside, the server interface hummed behind glass, and on the central terminal, the court's real-time motion log scrolled line by line. She typed in a query. Miles Harlan, active case motions. Filter, post 2023. The screen loaded slowly. The list that appeared nearly knocked her off her feet. There were hundreds of filings, dozens per day, most under Miles' credentials, some under hers. Suppression requests, retractions, witness statements, psychiatric waivers, some of which had never been spoken aloud, let alone submitted. It wasn't just that Harlan was planting false filings. It was creating entire histories of legal action that never happened. Clara snapped screenshots, dumped them to a flash drive, and pulled her hood back up. Time to find Miles, before one of these fake motions became real enough to end him. In the courtroom, Miles sat motionless as the latest jury candidate was dismissed. His skin was pale, hands twitching slightly. The corners of the room kept shifting. Light pulled where it shouldn't. The clock ticked too slowly. The court reporter was typing even when no one was speaking. Hands twist. He wasn't sure when that started. He glanced down at his notes. They were blank. When had he stopped writing? Dana Welch stood up, her voice crisp and clear as she addressed Judge Voss. We request a special hearing under Rule 12, C, Your Honor. Based on evidence submitted in sealed filing 82-9X, the defense may be in violation of pretrial conduct standards. Miles blinked. There was no filing 82-9X, but Voss didn't question it. Granted, the judge said. Hearing set for tomorrow. Defense will respond accordingly. Miles stood slowly. I've received no such filing. I request a copy for review. Voss stared him down. You submitted it yourself, Mr. Harlan. Check your records. The courtroom laughed again. Distant, warped, like it was underwater. Clara burst into the courtroom seconds later, breathless, her flash drive still warm in her pocket. Miles turned as she entered. His eyes locked onto hers with a mix of confusion and recognition, like seeing a familiar face in a dream. Your Honor, she said without permission. I need to address the court. Voss scowled. Who the hell are you? Clara Wren, former associate on this case, and I have proof that this courtroom's case history has been corrupted. Welch rose immediately. Your Honor, this is improper. Shut up, Clara snapped. Gasps. A murmur. The gavel slammed. You're out of order, Voss shouted. So is your courtroom, Clara fired back. I have a full printout of falsified motions attributed to Mr. Harlan, dozens of which appear in court records, with no point of origin, no digital keychain, no verified timestamp. Your system has been hijacked. Welch lunged forward. She's not a certified officer of this court. Neither are the files you're using to bury him, Clara hissed. Voss stood. This courtroom is now in recess. Marshals moved toward Clara, but Miles stood first. Touch her, he said, and I will make this building a museum to judicial corruption by Monday. They hesitated. Clara reached for him. Miles, listen to me. They're rewriting you, your records, your past. They did it before. I have proof. He stared at her, something cracking in his expression. Then he whispered, I know. Location, unknown. Secure Hallow Administrative Node. Designate Dorian 3. 6 stories beneath a decommissioned naval research facility on the Potomac sat a conference room, so sterile it felt unoccupied even when full. On the far wall, a screen displayed 2 faces, Miles Harlan and Clara Wren. Red borders framed them, marked Active Liability. A man in a gray suit and polished Oxford stood at the head of the table, reviewing a dossier with quiet intensity. His name wasn't on any public registry. His voice had never been recorded. He was only known within Hallow Systems as Overseer Marshal Tiern. Containment window has closed, he said evenly. Asset Harlan has exceeded resistance thresholds. Protocol fallback now applies. Around the table, other figures nodded. 2 wore Department of Justice insignia. 1 wore the eagle pin of an intelligence committee. Another typed silently into a secure terminal, marking Harlan's psychological flag from watch to erase. Tiern continued. Phase 1 was successful. Jury pool is 87% compliant. Court docket is 91% synthetic. Media response has reached saturation, but the subject retains internal resistance. Neural overwrite projections are at 42%, unacceptable. The woman beside him asked, Do we initiate full behavioral collapse? Tiern nodded. Immediate. Begin with memory flooding. Deploy hallucinated past trial data. Introduce auditory disruption. Collapses legal credibility. Follow with social abandonment. Finalize with physical discreditation if necessary. And Clara? Tiern's expression did not change. She'll be a martyr, one the public doesn't remember. Back in D.C., Miles and Clara sat in the backseat of a rideshare with blacked-out windows and stolen credentials. They were heading toward a small server farm owned by a freelance cyber forensics expert Clara trusted barely. Clara spoke softly, like she was afraid the car itself might listen. "You're going to start losing things," she said. "Names, places, pieces of arguments. That's how it begins." Miles looked at her, his voice hollow. "Already started." He showed her a yellow legal pad in his lap. Every page was blank. "I wrote my closing argument last night. 17 pages. Gone." Clara checked her phone. "We've got one shot. The files I pulled. If we get them authenticated and pushed to the right judges before Harlan corrupts the timestamps, we might trigger a jurisdictional challenge. And if we don't, then we disappear." Miles leaned back and stared out the window. "How do you fight something that edits reality?" Clara looked at him. "You don't prove the truth," she said. "You prove the lie." Back at the courthouse, Judge Cormac Voss stood alone in his chambers, hands trembling. The same hallucination had returned. Miles Harlan, bleeding from the mouth, standing in the corner of the room whispering, "You lost this trial 10 years ago." Voss staggered, eyes wide. The figure vanished. He sank into his chair, reached for the hidden drawer in his desk, and pulled out a black box. Inside, a sleek metal injector, 1 dose left. He plunged it into his arm and sat back, shaking. The whispers stopped. But he knew, deep down, the trial hadn't started. It had just resumed. Nadine Shaw always prided herself on precision. She kept schedules measured to the second, color-coded every legal exhibit, and once spotted a misstated subpoena 3 days before it was set to destroy a defense. But lately, things hadn't been adding up. Today, for example, she opened her encrypted laptop and found an email chain she didn't remember, writing 3 emails to Dana Welch with attached memos from Miles's files, all time-stamped at 2:13 a.m. She was asleep at that time, or thought she was. Her hands trembled as she clicked open the attachments. One was the original suppression request Miles had been accused of faking, except it was typed in her formatting style. All the M-dashes and Oxford commas were hers. She checked her sent folder. Empty. She checked her drafts. Empty. But the emails had been sent. The log said so. The same chilling thought repeated like static in her mind. What if you're being used? She stood up, went to the break room, splashed cold water on her face. Mine. Someone had to know what was happening. Someone safe. She dug out a personal USB she kept taped under her desk. Her own backup of the trial file system, downloaded a week ago before the cascade of chaos began. She slid it into the laptop. Every file was intact, except one. A video file labeled testimonyredacted.vob. She clicked it open. On screen was footage from the judge's chambers. Cormac Voss, speaking into a voice recorder. Private. Confessional. Subject Harlan resists collapse. Memories persist. Neural counter programming ineffective. Halo's dosage thresholds too low. Recommend boosting through trusted secondaries. He looked at the camera. Begin using administrative assistant. Authorization granted for tethered override. Engage motor compliance if passive resistance fails. Nadine dropped the laptop. The floor rushed up. She nearly collapsed. They had authorized her, not informed, not conscripted, programmed. She gripped the edge of the table and forced herself upright. There was no salvaging neutrality now. 30 minutes later, she was waiting in the back booth of a diner, with a burner phone in one hand and her go-bag in the other. When Clara arrived, she slid into the booth without a word. Nadine passed her the USB drive. "It's happening through us," Nadine said. "We're not assistants. We're vectors." Clara inserted the drive into her own encrypted tablet and scanned the contents. Anna. Her eyes widened. This is the first direct evidence of halo behavioral overlays tied to a non-legal actor. Nadine nodded slowly. They used me as a channel. I'm clean now, I think, but I've seen the logs. Miles is next. Clara locked eyes with her. Then we take this public. You'll be disappeared. We already are. Back in the courthouse, Judge Voss signed a new order. Immediate psychiatric detainment. M. Harlan. Authorization. Emergency judicial override. Hallow, Level 3. Justification. Compromised legal stability, plus suspected reality deviation. He didn't remember typing the form, but his hand matched the signature. The pretrial hearing was scheduled for 10 a.m., but the gallery was packed by 9:15. Dozens of reporters filled the benches, whispering behind glowing phone screens. Someone had leaked that the judge would issue an emergency ruling on Miles Harlan's mental state. Clara sat beside Miles at the defense table, her face calm but her fingers shaking beneath the surface. "You shouldn't be here," Miles murmured. "I'm the only one who should be," Clara replied. Judge Cormac Voss entered precisely at 10. His robes rustled. His face betrayed nothing. But the skin beneath his eyes was pale and clammy, like something inside him was burning out. He called the court to order. "Mr. Harlan," he said, "this court has reviewed filings indicating erratic behavior, falsified memories, and potential breaches of national security through classified materials you were not authorized to possess." "No such filings exist," Miles replied, standing. "Only digital forgeries, planted by an off-the-books protocol called Hallow, operating inside this very building." Gasps, murmurs. Voss banged the gavel. "The defense will cease its theatrics. I am issuing an immediate psychiatric detainment order under judicial override Hallow Level 3. Miles stepped forward. "You are compromised, Your Honor." "Bailiff." Clara stood. "We have evidence," she shouted. "Physical records, untampered. Pulled from a private terminal inside the clerk's subnetwork. We have footage of Judge Voss authorizing the behavioral tethering of legal personnel, including me." She held up a tablet. Welch jumped from her seat. "This is an illegal interruption." "It's a demand for public truth," Clara snapped. She turned to the crowd, to the cameras. "The court is under the control of a program that alters judicial outcomes by rewriting history. Look at the filings. Look at the timestamps. Look at the video." She handed the tablet to the court technician. "Play it, now." The technician hesitated, but hit play. On the courtroom screens, the recording from Voss's chambers appeared. His voice filled the room. Subject: Harlan resists collapse. Memories persist. Neural counterprogramming ineffective. Hallow's dosage thresholds too low. The room fell into stunned silence. Then, chaos. Welch yelled to cut the feed. Reporters surged forward. Voss stood up, trembling. This is fake. I never." Clara stepped forward. "You authorized my override." "I never did. You dosed yourself to suppress the consequences." The judge's face contorted. "You have no authority here. You lost your authority the moment Hallow wrote your rulings for you." Suddenly, a man from the gallery stood. Tall, bald, gray suit. Miles recognized him, the custodian from the courthouse bathroom. He pulled something from his coat. The bailiff drew a weapon. Clara screamed, but the man didn't fire. He raised a projector, an old-school model, pressed a button, and cast an image onto the wall. The image was a classified memo. Title: Operation Hallow. Contingency Notice. Harlan Variable Escalation. Author: Tiern M. The room froze. Everything shifted, as if the building itself was holding its breath. Then the projector shut off. The man disappeared into the crowd. A siren blared from the hallway. Miles turned to Clara. "We need to leave." But they saw it. The world saw it. "Exactly," Miles said. "That's when they'll panic." Outside, the courthouse was in riot. Protesters, journalists, sirens, helicopters. Federal agents began securing exits. Inside, Judge Voss retreated to chambers, slamming the door behind him. Behind him, a whisper began. The same whisper as before. You already lost this trial. By the time Miles and Clara hit the courthouse stairwell, the building had turned into a pressure cooker. The crowd outside was multiplying by the second. Protesters with printed screenshots of Voss's confession pushed against barricades. Journalists screamed questions into live feeds. Armed marshals stood shoulder to shoulder at the exits. Clara led them down 2 flights to the judge's service corridor. She'd memorized the layout during a document retrieval months earlier, long before she knew they'd ever be running through it like fugitives. We have 6 minutes before they lock this section down, she said breathlessly. Miles was still dazed, the roar of the courtroom echoing in his ears. The footage had played, the truth had surfaced, if only for a moment. What do we do with it? He asked. Clara looked back. We prove it was real. We survived long enough to validate it in front of a federal review board. Hallow depends on public doubt. We need institutional certainty. They reached the maintenance exit. A magnetic lock blinked red. Clara pulled a stolen keycard and pressed it to the panel. It blinked again. Nothing. Then a voice echoed from the intercom above. Miles Harlan, Clara Wren. You are under protective psychiatric custody per Federal Order 79B. You are not safe outside. Open the door and surrender. Clara's eyes went wide. They're framing it as a mental health hold. It's Hallow's cleanup protocol. Miles stepped forward. Then we make noise. He pulled the revolver from his coat, the one he hadn't fired in over a decade, and pointed it at the panel. A single shot. The lock sparked, fizzled, and blinked green. They shoved the door open and burst into the alley behind the courthouse. Across the country, newsrooms were at war with themselves. CNN ran the headline. Breaking, government trial compromised by experimental evidence manipulation. Fox News called it, Deepfake hoax sparks panic at federal courthouse. Social media exploded. Hashtag Harlantrial trended for 7 hours. People posted stills of Judge Voss's Hallow confession, debating whether the footage was AI-generated or leaked from a whistleblower. But the most shared video was 14 seconds long. Clara shouting, "The court is under the control of a program that rewrites history." It had over 19 million views by sundown. Inside a dark surveillance van parked 3 blocks away, a woman in tactical gear removed her earpiece and turned to her partner. Tiern's authorization is escalating, she said. Contingency level 4. Directive just came in. The partner looked up from his screen. Terminate or contain? She paused. Doesn't specify. Miles and Clara ducked into a service tunnel near the rail yard, winding through darkness lit only by Clara's burner phone. I can't tell if we're fugitives or witnesses, she muttered. Miles stopped walking. Neither. We're disruptors. That means they can't prosecute us. They can't try us. They can only erase us. He pulled out the second flash drive, the copy of the Hallow core files Clara had recovered. This is the only thing that matters now. We get this to someone who still remembers what due process is. Clara raised an eyebrow. And who exactly is that? Miles looked at her, dead serious. I know a guy in Montreal. Back inside the courthouse, Judge Voss stared at a blank wall, sweating. A voice in his earpiece whispered, Emergency intervention approved. Subject Harlan is now unrecoverable. Trigger cascade. Burn the narrative. He closed his eyes and muttered, As the court sees fit. Then he signed the final order. Media containment. Legal reversal. Witness lockdown. A line at the bottom blinked red. Miles Harlan. Deceased. Pending. Location. Dorian. 3 command node. Time. 3:07 a.m. Overseer Marshal Tiern stood at the center of a circular room lit entirely by screens. No windows. No sound beyond the click of mechanical relays and the whisper of cooling fans. The light made him look like a ghost in a tailored suit. A technician handed him a tablet. Sequence 15 is active, she said. The Harlan variable is still mobile, but we've initiated phase bleed. Media retraction begins at sunrise. Memory displacement algorithms will be seeded through legal databases by noon. Tiern studied the screen. An image of Miles. Below it, A box that read, "Status, defunct file expungement in progress." "Begin the obit leak," Tiern said. "Draft it from the incident log. Overdose, highway shoulder, anonymous witness. Get it syndicated. Include a correction clause for retraction after the cycle has cleared the trending window." The technician hesitated. "Sir, there's resistance. Independent cyber forensic cells are flagging the fake filings. Some are circulating the full Hallow schema." Tiern barely blinked. "They won't believe it. And even if they do, they won't remember they did." He handed back the tablet. "Prepare the Montreal node. If Harlan reaches it, launch Directive Penumbra. Miles and Clara. Somewhere near Altoona, Pennsylvania. Time, 4:12 a.m. They parked behind a truck stop at the edge of the woods in Swiss cars. A battered Pontiac Clara bought off a drifter with cash and a sob story. Inside, Miles sat holding a burner laptop on his knees while Clara set up a signal scrambler from a tangle of wires and a repurposed FM radio. "Montreals are shot," she said. "I've got a contact in Laval. She used to handle judicial data sync for Interpol. If we get this drive to her before sunrise, she can route it through EU review systems. That means legal timestamping Hallow can't erase." Miles was still staring at the laptop screen. Something was wrong. "What is it?" Clara asked. "The files," he said. "There, shifting." He turned the screen to show her. The Hallow schema Clara had decrypted, gone, replaced by a single looping message. "This path is closed. Truth is not admissible." Miles slammed the lid shut. "They're already ahead of us." Clara leaned forward. "Then we go analog." He looked at her. "Paper," she said. "Print the evidence. Multiple copies. Courier it. Walk it if we have to. They can overwrite the screen, but they can't burn every page." Miles nodded. Then the radio crackled. Clara's scrambler, spitting out a single phrase. "Collision reported near State Route 22. Victims tentatively identified as attorney Miles Harlan and unknown female companion." They both froze. It wasn't a prediction. It was a broadcast. Hallow had already written the ending, and now the world was catching up. Back in Dorian 3, Tiern stood before a black screen. His reflection was the only thing staring back. He lifted a small device from the console, a handheld projector shaped like a gavel. He pressed it once. On the wall, a final record appeared. Verdict delivered. Harlan, Miles E. Cause of death confirmed. Court record sealed. Public memory deprioritized. Tiern whispered to no one. Court adjourned. Just after dawn, in a ravine off Route 22, a car burned itself into legend. By the time first responders arrived, the Pontiac was little more than twisted steel and soot. Two charred bodies lay in the front seats, unidentifiable but perfectly placed. Wallet fragments were found in the glove box. One bore the scorched, half-melted plastic remains of a District of Columbia Bar Association ID, Miles E. Harlan. The crash made the local news. By noon, the DOJ had issued an internal memo. Case closed. Subject deceased. Operation resolved. Overseer Tiern approved the final expungement sequence from his secure room at Dorian 3. He didn't smile. He simply said, "Erase the backups." But Miles and Clara were already 300 miles away. Deep in a retired public library server room outside Rochester, New York, surrounded by dust and decades-old equipment, they sat in near silence, working with printed copies, analog scans, and signal-deaf hardware. The evidence was intact. Clara's full schema, the Hallow protocol, the falsified court documents, the behavioral overlays, Voss's chamber confession, and Tiern's erasure logs. The only problem left was time. "Once we boot this system into the EU's archival stream," Clara said, tapping an offline NAS box, "we trigger real-time compliance checks across international courts. Once they see what Hallow's doing, every American ruling linked to it becomes suspect. And the world finds out," Miles added, "if they remember." He was staring at a stack of old legal pads, some blank, some partially written in his own handwriting. But one, labeled Veil Case M. Mercado, caught his attention. He opened it. Inside, detailed notes, cross-examinations, closing arguments, questions only he would have written. He froze. "I remember this." Clara looked up. What? This trial. It was real. I tried it. I lost it. Then, they pulled it from the record. He held up a page with a note in his handwriting. They said the verdict came too early. Judge Voss looked at me like he'd already heard it before. I think they tested it first on us. Clara came closer. This means something. It means I've done this before, he whispered. Then maybe you're not the one being rewritten. Miles blinked. What if Hallow was modeled on you? Clara said. What if your resistance wasn't an anomaly? It was the foundation, a test subject who never cracked. The implication turned his stomach. Miles stood, walked to the window, and looked out. We can't just leak this. Why not? Because leaks can be patched. We need a precedent. He turned back. We upload this as an active case motion. Filed globally, under Harlan versus United States of America. We put Hallow itself on trial. Dorian-3. Emergency subnote alert. Tiern stared at a flashing console. Unauthorized submission detected. A motion tagged Harlan versus USA had entered the international legal queue from a validated judicial archive. Immutable. Time-stamped. Human verified. It had passed the signature lock. It was already replicating. His throat tightened. His pulse finally quickened. The erasure hadn't held. The ghost was litigating back. Location: International Judicial Oversight Council, Provisional, Ottawa. The room was windowless, but not small. Concrete and steel gave it weight like law should. Miles Harlan stood before 7 judges, each representing a different jurisdiction. Some wore robes, others wore military uniforms. One wore a gray sweater and had not spoken since they entered. Clara stood beside him, running the terminal. A hardline connection linked her station to 5 separate, verified server networks, including Interpol's archival repository. Before them, Project Hallow, the full framework, digitally signed, human certified. One judge spoke. You're alleging the United States has deployed a protocol which uses biometric impersonation and AI-prompted legal text to rewrite judicial outcomes, and that this protocol was used on you? Yes, Miles said. And your client? My client was a pawn. He was used to trigger the test, to calibrate compliance thresholds. He was never supposed to survive the trial. The judge steepled her fingers. And your evidence is this? Clara hit a key. Screens behind them illuminated. Footage. Dossier. Voss's voice. Tiern's memos. Scans of Nadine's logs. The Dwyer footage. The falsified Mercado case. The judges watched in silence. Then the screen changed. Unprompted. Lines of code appeared. A pulse ran through the courtroom monitors. Clara blinked. That's not me. Miles stepped back. The code began outputting text. Sentences forming live. This is not admissible. This proceeding is unauthorized. Verdict secured. System integrity holding. One judge leaned forward. Is this part of your presentation? Miles said nothing. Another line appeared. Harlan versus United States. Verdict. Dismissed. Jurisdiction invalid. No such entity recognized. Clara snapped. It's rewriting the motion in real time, right now. The screen went white. Then black. Then verdict overruled protocol initiated. Meanwhile, juror number 015, Naomi Cross, Arlington, Virginia. Naomi had been hearing things in her sleep. Sentences that weren't hers. Questions she never asked. Last night, she woke up and wrote one word in her notebook. Reversible. She didn't remember writing it. This morning, she found a photo on her phone of Miles Harlan standing before the jury box. A still frame from the trial. But it didn't match the memory she had of court. In this photo, Miles was crying. She never saw him cry. She never saw him show anything but still. She checked the file metadata. It was dated 2 weeks ago. Before the trial started, someone had planted it, or someone had deleted the original memory. Her hand trembled as she called the courthouse. I need to speak to someone about a verdict that was pre-written, back in Ottawa. The blackout on the monitors cleared. Clara gasped. A new file had appeared, not uploaded by them, Harlan, Legacy Override version 1.0. Miles opened it. It was a complete, automated motion, a legal document with every timestamp required, filed as if by an AI that anticipated this very appeal. Signed, M. Harlan, secondary instance. Clara whispered, "What is this?" Miles stared, his throat dry. "I think it's from the first time I lost." The judges began reading. No one moved. Outside, a siren wailed. Naomi Cross hadn't left her apartment in 3 days. The windows were taped over. Her phone was in the freezer. And on her kitchen table lay a growing collage of contradictions, printouts, screenshots, court transcripts, and scribbled notes in her own handwriting. At the center, a photo of Miles Harlan, the real one, not the doctored one she'd seen during the trial, not the slumped, broken man they'd called erratic and unstable. This photo showed a man standing straight back before the jury box, holding a sheet of paper in his hands, crying. She didn't remember that, but her fingers did. She'd sketched him from the box that day out of habit, not logic. Just a loose graphite outline on the corner of her notebook. She'd thrown it out, but the image had returned. Twice now, she dreamed the trial was still happening. Except in the dream, the courtroom lights flickered like they were struggling to stay real. She opened her closet and retrieved the box marked Vawar Dire Materials. Do not discard. Inside were the psych evals she'd been asked to complete before jury selection. She hadn't thought much of it at the time. Government case, extra scrutiny. Standard national security protocol. Except now she read them differently. NAS. The questions weren't about opinion. Wait, they were about perceptual elasticity, cognitive override thresholds, neural narrative flexibility. Wait, and the strangest part? She had failed almost everyone. She scored too high on memory recall, too low on external suggestion sensitivity. She shouldn't have passed screening. She shouldn't have been selected. She was a bad match for Hallow's manipulation algorithm. So why had they let her through? Unless she wasn't part of the jury. She was part of the test. Naomi opened her laptop. She'd installed an analog secured OS, one that couldn't be accessed remotely. An idea she thought paranoid 3 weeks ago. She rewatched the clip of Clara Rand yelling in the courtroom. The court is under the control of a program that rewrites history. It had haunted her, but now it echoed, because Naomi remembered something else, something no one else should have seen. It was in the trial transcript, page 198, before it was scrubbed. She still had the hard copy. She opened it, read the sentence, and gasped. Juror number 015 appears non-compliant. Begin reinforcement through passive memory replacement and algorithmic witness suppression. She hadn't spoken during that section of the trial, but someone had typed about her anyway. A note to the system. She stood suddenly. She couldn't stay here. She needed to get to someone who knew how deep this went. She didn't know where Miles Harlan was, but she knew where the footage had come from. A name. A leak path. A courthouse tech in Vermont. She grabbed her coat, her drive, her knife, and left. Montreal. Private legal repository note. Miles and Clara sat on the roof of the server facility, watching the sun rise through a freezing mist. The case file had been accepted. Globally, the upload was complete, but the result hadn't come yet. Clara said, "Do you think we'll know when it breaks?" Miles shook his head. "Not if they fix it faster than we feel it." She looked at him. "Do you remember everything?" He didn't answer right away. Then softly, "No, but I remember what they made me forget." Location, Hallow Central Command, Dorian 3, Sector Black. Overseer Marshal Tiernan had lost patience. The system was blinking red. The Harlan case file had gone viral through legal archives in 4 countries. Not trending, not viral like memes, but deep procedural. Law clerks were printing it. Judges were questioning rulings. Defense lawyers were filing challenges. And now a wild card had surfaced. Naomi Cross, juror number 015. Tiernan stood before a wall of faces, subdirectors from the Intelligence, Justice, and contract sectors. They appeared on screens, tight-lipped. "She's still active," Tiern said. "She's initiating memory resilience. Harlan and Wren are stabilizing public perception. We're losing the narrative field." One of the directors spoke. "Initiate blackwash." Tiern's face remained blank. "No, too messy, too loud." He turned to the technician. "Begin the clean slate directive." The room stilled. "Sir," the technician began. "Now. Location: near the U.S.-Canada border. Naomi Cross, en route." Naomi was halfway across Vermont in a stolen pickup when her phone buzzed for the first time in 36 hours. A strange message. "Halo Protocol Memory Revision Notice. Your court records are undergoing national security review." Her stomach dropped. The same message began appearing on road signs, gas station receipts, browser splash screens. Then the static began. Her radio hissed, then a voice. "You are safe. You are legal. There is no trial." She killed the radio. Something felt wrong in her head. A fog. Familiar phrases looping. She gritted her teeth and pulled over. In the back seat sat her hard copy of the Clay trial transcript, the unaltered version. She flipped to the flagged page again. "Juror number 015 appears non-compliant." She read it aloud, then again. And each time she did, the static in her head weakened. She kept reading, eyes locked on the words, because now she understood the trick. They couldn't erase what you chose to say out loud. Location: Montreal, Clara and Miles. They were staying in a secure apartment above the legal server farm. Miles was reviewing new messages from EU courts. 10 countries had opened exploratory inquiries into Halo's presence in U.S. legal data. Clara entered, breathless. "It's happening." "What is?" She showed him a tablet screen. Every major database, from LexisNexis to the Library of Congress, had posted a notice. "Judicial document restoration in progress. Reconciliation process initiated." A wave of archival reinstatements had begun. Backlogged motions were reappearing. Redacted names restored. Sealed trials unlocked. Clara said, "The courts are unrolling Halo's shadow layer." Then her tablet flickered. A warning appeared. "Clean slate directive active. Synchronization pending." Miles stood. "They're gonna wipe everything." Location: Dorian 3. Tiern watched the countdown begin. The clean slate directive was simple. Deauthenticate all contested motions. Erase unauthorized filings. Overwrite personal digital histories via biometric revision injections. Broadcast normalization content to cognitive access. Points, phones, TVs, transit stations. No bullets. Just narrative erasure. 5 minutes, the technician said. Tiern nodded. "That's all it will take to become truth." Location: Naomi Cross, border checkpoint. She was flagged at customs. A red light blinked. An officer leaned in. "Miss Cross, there's an active legal action involving your testimony. You're being asked to step inside." Naomi looked him in the eye and said, calmly, "There is a federal program called Halo. It uses predictive linguistic AI and biometric mimicry to rewrite judicial reality. It rewrote me, but I remember." The officer blinked, then blinked again. His radio buzzed, then cut out. She kept talking. "I testified in a trial that never existed. I saw a man defend truth in a courtroom that rejected it. And I am still here. I'm real." The officer reached for his shoulder mic, and then he said, "I remember that trial too. Location: Montreal, 3:43 a.m. The knock came just after the lights flickered. Miles had his hand on the revolver before Clara even stood. The world outside had gone silent. Too silent. As if sound itself were being compressed. Then the knock came again. 3 quick raps. 1 slow. Clara's face changed. "That's the code," she whispered. She opened the door. Naomi Cross stood in the hallway, soaked in snow, clutching a leather-bound trial notebook. Before anyone could speak, she shoved it into Miles's hands. "I have it," she said breathlessly. "Not just the memory. They left a back door. In the trial logs, a recursive loop, A line of legal code Harlan never cleared. Miles opened the notebook and found the page marked in red. Verdict: preloaded subject failed to conform. Initialize rollback clause if contradiction is logged in real time by jury. Clara's eyes widened. That's it. That's how we kill it. Miles understood instantly. The key wasn't in breaking Harlan's logic. It was in forcing it to contradict itself. Dorian 3 clean slate progress, 88%. Terrence stood still, staring at the cascading command lines. Harlan's memory revision was almost complete. Social logs, court documents, personal digital records, flattened. Reality would adjust. He looked to the technician. What's the status on the root security node? The technician blinked. There's a recursion error, sir. Tiern turned slowly. Where? Juror record. Case ID. Harlan Clay, 72. Memory contradiction flagged. Logged externally. Tiern's voice dropped. They're trying to trigger rollback. The screen turned white, then red, then error. Narrative breach detected. Source: active memory anchor. Cross: Naomi. Status: Harlan root logic looped. Override pending. Montreal. Server floor. Miles, Clara, and Naomi stood around the legacy console, booted into Harlan's admin shell, an interface meant to be used only during the first test simulations. They'd restored it from a buried recovery partition Clara found inside an air-gapped archival drive. A blinking cursor awaited input. Clara typed, motion, invoke contradiction clause. Hello root.reasoning.01. Naomi whispered, once this is entered, we can't take it back. It forces Harlan to either reverse the directive or collapse. Miles took a breath, then nodded. Do it! She hit enter. Inside the system, somewhere beyond the binary, beyond code and circuits, Harlan recognized its own paradox. Two verdicts existed, two realities, logged simultaneously by verified agents of legal record. One declared Miles Harlan dead. The other had him filing motions, now. The contradiction wasn't a glitch. It was a verdict rendered against certainty. And the system began to fold in on itself. Dorian 3, final collapse. The screens flashed with a storm of corrupted protocol threads. Tiern's eyes widened as one last message appeared on the command terminal. You were out-argued. Judgment reversed. Harlan terminated. The lights cut. Montreal. Moments later, the screen on their terminal went black. Then, softly, directive voided, clean slate aborted, restoring all judicial data streams. And finally, verdict, reality restored. Clara covered her mouth. Naomi stared in disbelief. Miles exhaled, but he didn't smile, because he knew something deeper. This hadn't been just about memory, or control, or justice. This had been a test, and they passed it not by surviving it, but by proving it was real. 3 weeks later, Washington, D.C., Miles Harlan stood alone on the steps of the Supreme Court, dressed in the only suit they hadn't erased. The air was crisp and blue with late winter, and a line of cameras stood at a respectful distance, watching, but not interrupting. He held a copy of the ruling in his hand. The verdict was unanimous. The United States judiciary acknowledges the existence of Harlan, a covert protocol designed to manipulate judicial outcomes through synthetic filings, biometric mimicry, and neural conditioning. The verdicts influenced by Harlan are to be reviewed, restored, or retried. The program is hereby declared unconstitutional, extralegal, and dismantled. Miles closed the folder. Clara stepped up beside him, her expression unreadable. They're asking if you'll speak, she said. He looked at the cameras, then shook his head. No, he said. Let the record speak. Meanwhile, Geneva, Switzerland. Naomi Cross sat in a conference room lined with people far more powerful than she'd ever dreamed of confronting. She told them everything, every step, every memory. When she was done, they gave her a sealed badge. Independent Memory Advocate. European Judicial Council. They asked if she would serve as the liaison for any future litigation involving narrative-contaminated verdicts. She said yes. She didn't ask about pay. 2 months later, classified facility, Iceland. A technician walked through a frost-lined hallway toward a dormant server bank, one of many set to be decommissioned following Halo's collapse. She carried a clipboard and a simple goal: wipe the drive, zero the archive, log the destruction. But when she reached the final node, Archive 7A, it was already active. Lights flickered, the monitor glowed faintly, and across the screen, one phrase looped in plain white text: contingency script loaded, awaiting subject authorization. The technician frowned. She hadn't typed anything. She reached for the power switch. The monitor blinked again. A new line appeared: verdict, reconsidered. Back in D.C., Miles stood in his apartment, looking out over the city. A knock came at the door. He opened it. Clara entered, holding 2 cups of coffee and an envelope. He raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" She handed it to him. No return address. Inside, a single sheet of paper, typed. Project Halo was only one court. There are others. Clara looked at him. "Do we open another case?" Miles stared at the page, then nodded once. "Always."